I was at home 5:15 in the morning on Friday the 10th and received a phone call. All I was told was I had to go into Fairview Park where there had been an assault. I left home and I went into Technical Bureau in Phoenix Park where I collected my equipment and also met up with the Garda photographer. Well, I arrived at 6:40 and the scene had been cordoned off and being preserved.
Edwin Hancock is a retired detective inspector from Ireland's police service and Garda Síochána.
I was attached to the ballistics section and we specialise in explosives, firearms and scenes of crime examination.
September 10th, 1982. The badly beaten body of 31-year-old Declan Flynn was found in Fairview Park, Dublin.
Gardaí today searched the park for clues that would lead them to the man's attackers. They say two people walking through the park found him at 1:30 this morning near the bandstand, not far from the main road. He was suffering from serious head injuries and died before he reached hospital.
Declan was killed just a few hundred yards across the road from where we are now. The scene was actually in a grass area which came right up to the footpath along the main road. He'd be about 30 to 40 feet away from escaping. It's a very rough sketch that I drew when I was examining the scene. It shows the fence along by the children's park. There were 3 areas of blood on the grass. The first area measured about 2 inches diameter, and a foot from that there was a long piece of blood, about 1 foot 4 inches long, tapering from 2 inches up to 6 inches. And I took possession of 3 sticks altogether. That was an indication there were at least 3 people involved. So it was a vicious attack. I mean, those sticks that were used were quite heavy. I weighed the sticks and I compared them to the official police truncheon that we were all issued with as policemen. But its weight was only 13 ounces, whereas all the sticks that were used were considerably heavier than that. They were formidable weapons.
It was a very busy house with 9 children and mum and dad, so there was always a lot of coming and going and friends calling. It was like a train station at times.
My name's Gabriel Fay and Declan was my older brother.
I'm Lorraine Crowley and Declan was my older brother as well. I do have very happy memories of Declan Christmas time. That was his absolute favourite time of the year. And he was very, very generous.
He may come home with a set of Delf and hand them to Mammy. He always came home with bags. Our first child was born in April 1982. To say that he absolutely loved Stephen, the baby, was an understatement. Stephen was 5 months old when Declan was murdered. Yeah.
My name is Paul Flynn and I'm Declan Flynn's brother. The way he fit into our house was he was a caring person, but also a person that needed a lot of care as well. He had a stammer, and as he grew older, we realised that he had learning difficulties. The more kind of excited he got, or the more nervous he got, the more he stammered. So it was something that really he struggled with all his life. He was also left-handed. He was actually beaten by the teachers for using his left hand. He would have definitely had challenges when it comes to making new friends and would have been painfully shy, I think, when meeting people for the first time. He definitely needed extra help, and my mother was very, very good to him. She put a huge amount of effort into helping him, and to be fair to him, the love she gave him, he returned that love to her as well. Sorry. Sorry.
I can remember the day very well. It's one of those days that will stick in your mind forever. We heard on the radio news that a man's body had been found in Fairview Park, and we were just remarking, gosh, that's not very far from here, really. Came home that evening from work and Mum was at home. She had been in town that morning, and it was only when she came up from town in the early afternoon she realised Declan hadn't come home the previous night and his bed hadn't been slept in. And she was quite upset. She was cooking dinner, but she was quite upset. She said, "Did you read the paper?" And she handed me the Evening Herald, and I read the description of the man whose body had been found in Fairview Park. And my heart sank because it sounded just like Declan. And the only thing I didn't know was, they said the man had green eyes. I didn't know Declan had green eyes. Sorry.
Eventually, my eldest brother, Chris, and my sister, Miriam, decided to go up to Blanchardstown. And they met a guard up there. He brought Christopher in to see the body. When Christopher saw him first, he wasn't even sure if it was Declan because he was so badly beaten. I'll never forget the sound that came from my parents. It was like something left their bodies. I think it's a kind of a sound only a parent can make when they lose a child. Even though he was an adult, he had a lot of childlike features, and he was one of those vulnerable people that needed protection. Sorry.
Declan's injuries consisted of he had a black eye, very badly swollen, his cut underneath here, his nose was grazed, and he had 1 3/4 inch cut here in the back of his head. He actually died from inhalation of his own blood. The knees of Declan's trousers were grass-stained. The indication that he was on the ground when he was getting beaten. Yes, we checked for defensive injuries and we didn't see any indication of them, which would tend to suggest that he was completely overpowered and didn't have a chance to defend himself. And he must have been absolutely terrified. He died a horrible death.
Hi, I'm Tony Walsh, and for the last 30 years, I've curated what's now known as the Irish Queer Archive, which was transferred to state ownership in 2008. I only came out in 1979, and the LGBT civil rights movement at that point was in its infancy. As a 19-year-old, I was quite naive and actually blind to the dangers that lurked around, and there were many. Dublin was dirt poor, economically, socially depressed. That was also aggravating the significant heroin crisis. And I had a revelatory moment when I discovered the Hirschfeld Centre. I was hooked the minute I walked in there. Dublin's second attempt at an LGBT community centre was only 6 months old. There were very few social spaces available to us. All forms of intimacy between men was criminalised. Technically, you get 2 years for holding hands or kissing in public. Yes, of course I knew Declan Flynn. I mean, he was part of what we call the social subcommittee. And that was a group of people that was entrusted with running all of the social events in the Hirschfeld Centre. And Declan ran the coffee bar.
He would have been very well known because he was kind of a volunteer in the Hirschfeld Centre, so most people would have had some interaction with him when they came out. To me, he seemed like an extraordinarily shy, quiet man. And I think he liked the coffee bar in particular because it gave him a chance to speak to other people without feeling too vulnerable in the conversation.
I mean, I knew he was gay because actually we had those conversations and I saw his name on our members' book and everything.
Declan settled in at the Hirschfeld Centre, but outside, homosexuality remained illegal, and there was little support for a change in the law.
The occasion of this unusual protest vigil outside the RTE studios was the appearance of 2 lesbian nuns on the Late Late Show. The protesters had a statue of the Virgin Mary strapped to the roof of a caravan.
When news trickled in of Declan in September 1982, I don't think many of us were that surprised. There was a culture of homophobic violence that simmered on the surface of Irish society throughout the 70s and 80s. There was a litany of what we now consider like anti-gay hate crimes. People being beaten up with impunity and people being murdered.
You know, obviously the scene was much smaller, it was much more covert, it was pockmarked by violent homophobia that was, you know, kind of accepted within society. So the killing of Declan Flynn didn't occur in a vacuum. There was a hotel porter in Cork actually killed the night before Declan Flynn was killed in September '82. And there was also around the same time another homophobic killing, Ballymena. But one of the really major kind of events that occurred that year was the killing of Charles Self.
Charles Self was a gay man found stabbed to death in his home in Monkstown in January 1982. Just 9 months later, Declan became the 4th gay man to die a violent death that year. David Norris served as an Irish senator across 5 decades.
I'm in an unusual position for somebody of my social background. I've known 8 people who were murdered. Now that tells you something about being gay. The first time I encountered Declan Flynn was on the opening night of the Hirschfeld Centre. A group of us, about 4 or 5 of us, came back here and had a glass of champagne to celebrate. And Declan was one of the people who came back. I didn't really know him up till that point, but he came back and he was nice. And we had a photograph was taken. And poor Declan, he looked so innocent and sensitive and vulnerable. And of course he was vulnerable and he paid for it. Poor fellow.
Declan was still living at home and continuing to volunteer at the Hirschfeld Centre. But he also had a day job, which he enjoyed.
He was based in Dublin Airport and he was part of the ground operations in Arinta. And that seemed to be probably the happiest place for him to work. We were a bit worried about him as he'd been bullied in school. So we were worried if he would bond and fit in there.
Some of his fellow employees were on a night out, kind of gay spotting for fun, you know, going into the gay bars and whatnot. And they came to Bartley Duns and they saw Declan and they teased him about it. And that stopped him going. And he started going instead to Fairview Park. And that was where he met his end, very sadly.
Detectives now began to piece together Declan's last known movements.
So the night he was killed was September the 9th, 1982. He'd been in a pub in Donecarney, Belton's pub, with a friend, and had met another friend then just outside the Fairview Grill. And then had crossed into Fairview Park. Fairview Park, at the time, it would have been known to be a place where gay men would have hung out, a lot like in the same way like Burkey and Phoenix Park and things like that. So it was kind of known as that kind of place.
The only opportunities we had to negotiate desire and intimacy lurked in the shadows.
In the early 80s and late 70s, probably most gay men on the scene had gone to a gay cruising area, either a public park or public toilet at some point. Cruising is a very covert activity, so when you're cruising, you're not being deliberately kind of provocative. It's very discreet. There's a kind of dance or kind of walking up and down, making sure that the person that you're interested in knows that you're there without necessarily making your own hand very obvious. When I found out it was Declan who had been killed in Fairview Park, I was very surprised because he's so shy and quiet. I didn't think he had the wherewithal to go cruising. To me, it sounded more likely that he was simply on his way home.
Whatever Declan's reasons, few were in any doubt about his attacker's motivation, including police.
Yeah, we were aware that gay men had been attacked in the park at night time, which had been going on for at least a couple of months before this.
Now Declan's family were forced to ask whether police could have prevented his death.
We were later told by a guard he had gone in to patrol Fairview Park the night before Declan was killed, and that his officer in charge had told him not to do that, to go off and do something else instead.
In September 1982, 31-year-old Declan Flynn was found dead in Fairview Park in Dublin. He had been badly beaten. Police believed it was a homophobic attack, and newspaper reports now focused on Declan's sexuality.
We didn't know Declan as a gay person, we just knew him as our brother. That was it.
But I mean, obviously, if we'd known, we would have been totally accepting of it because he was our brother and we loved him.
It must have been very difficult for Declan Flynn's family to have to engage with the extraordinary level of media interest, putting a backstory to Declan's personality.
It definitely felt that Declan was being stigmatised for being gay. There was more attention focused on that than on the thugs that had actually beat him to death. All that attention was very difficult for the family.
Following the killing, Detective Inspector Edwin Hancock expected to be involved in a lengthy manhunt. But within hours, 5 males were in custody.
The first thing I knew about arrest was on the Sunday when I got a phone call to go into Fitzgibbon Street Garda Station that the suspects were in detention.
Robert Armstrong, who was 18, Anthony Marr, 18, Patrick Kavanagh, 18, there was Colm Donovan, who was 17, and then there was a 14-year-old boy who couldn't be named at the time.
Detectives were surprised when all 5 suspects quickly confessed to killing Declan.
By and large, you know, they all essentially gave an account of what happened. They basically said that one of them sat on the bench almost as some kind of type of bait or something. The rest of them were waiting, I think, behind trees or behind bushes and things like that with sticks as weapons.
I went into Fitzgibbon Street on the Sunday afternoon and I met Anthony Marr and Robert Armstrong. They were 2 members of the Defence Forces.
Their confessions meant all 5 suspects now faced murder charges and possible life sentences, yet none of them seemed concerned.
They were very polite, very cooperative. They gave no trouble and they made their statements to the Gardaí present. I also met Dr. Percy Patton, the Garda doctor. He took blood and hair samples from the 2 and gave them to me. I also showed them what I'd gathered from the scene. One of them said that he recognised the 6.
When Declan Flynn passed, they basically jumped out and attacked him. And they beat him really, really brutally with sticks. They kicked him, they beat him on the ground to the point that basically he passed out from concussion, from head injuries, and from bleeding. There, he died.
They were totally cooperative and very friendly, and there was no sense of hostility from them. They made statements freely. I didn't get the impression that they were scared. No, not at all.
The following statements were included in statements made to the police by the accused, which were subsequently read in court in evidence. The gang was acting as a kind of self-professed vigilante group. They had wanted, quote, to clear our park of what we call queers, unquote. They had been, in their words, queer bashing for about 6 weeks before and had battered 20 steamers. What this gang did to Declan Flynn was part of a sustained campaign against gay people in Fairview Park. I think it's clear that their attitude to the crime they'd committed was that it was a justified activity. A journalist at the time of the Flynn case reported, "One went queer bashing once. Himself and his 2 mates went out to rob a car, but they couldn't find one, so they decided to go down to Berg Quay and wait for a few queers." The queer bashing, to use the gang's language, they viewed it as a leisure activity. It was something you did with your friends. It was a pleasurable way of spending an evening. It was good fun. In his statement, Marr claimed, "We didn't mean to kill Mr. Flynn. I thought he was gay and in the park to meet other gay people." The second statement there does seem like some attempt to justify the violence that they inflicted on Declan Flynn.
They had claimed that they had physically attacked or assaulted 20 men. It was a violent homophobic mission that they were on and had been on for about a month and a half.
These were views and values of a homophobic nature that were deeply embedded in Irish life. Did they perhaps feel that this killing of a gay man, that it would be perceived as less serious by the society, including the courts?
News of the gang's homophobic vigilante campaign came as no surprise to the gay community, and police knew about it too.
Yeah, we were aware that gay men had been attacked in the park. It had been going on for at least a couple of months before this.
There were various reports of people being queer bashed in Fairview Park and in Phoenix Park and elsewhere. So there were quite a number of reports that we were hearing about at the time. Indeed, I knew several people myself personally who were bashed on several occasions.
I remember a bright summer's day at 10:30 at night outside a bar just off Grafton Street in Dublin, having my head kicked in and my finger broken by 3 guys who were screaming nasty abuse at me. And the worst thing is, nobody came to my rescue, and I can guarantee, I didn't even bother, I can guarantee if I'd gone down to the police station, they wouldn't have actually taken it seriously. The relationship between the Gardaí and the lesbian gay community was fraught.
The police inquiry into the murder of Charles Self had involved the entire gay community and left many feeling their sexuality was under investigation.
They feared being outed to their families. Some men were married and their wives obviously didn't know about it. They had children. People at work in their workplaces would feel that their jobs were compromised.
At that particular time, homosexuality was illegal in this country. The consequence of all that would be that a lot of crime and incidents were not being reported. So the Gardaí couldn't have known the full extent of what was actually happening in there.
Following Declan's death, others came forward to say they too were victims of violence in Fairview Park and claimed their reports were ignored by police, like Sean Purcell, a sub-editor at the Irish Press newspaper.
I was pulled to the ground and I was held on the ground by one man lying across my head, while 2 others beat me systematically with sticks.
What response did you get to that complaint to the Gardaí?
The Garda said he'd keep an eye out while he was patrolling the area. I heard no more about the attack until Declan Flynn was found dying in the park one morning in September.
Frustrated at the lack of action by the police, some in the gay community began gathering their own evidence.
An activist friend of ours, Eddie, got reports of a gang of thugs up in Fairview Park and spent several months actually shadowing them.
You'd made a list of names of all the people and their addresses who were doing the attacks. Had this been given to the police prior to Declan Flynn's murder?
Oh yes, about 4 months beforehand.
What had the reaction to police? Did you do anything about it?
Little or nothing. I think that I got browned off dealing with Clontarf. Anyone that has gone up to Clontarf in the past with complaints have just got a negative response, And it made people very, distrustful of going up there.
And at one point, when he insisted on trying to get them to take it seriously, they threatened to arrest him.
We were later told by a guard he had gone in to patrol Fairview Park the night before Declan was killed, and that his officer in charge had told him not to do that, to go off and do something else instead. And that's very hard to bear, to know that, something could have been done, but because they didn't obviously consider somebody who was gay or different in some way, obviously wasn't important enough to actually make sure they were safe.
That attitude was common right across society in 1980s Ireland.
So it meant that Ireland was a really uncomfortable place to come out in. It was an uncomfortable place to grow up as a gay man or a woman, or as a trans man or woman. It was like living under the Taliban. That's what I always feel the late 70s and 80s was, living under the Taliban.
David, why do gay people feel they're an oppressed minority?
Well, because in certain ways I think we are oppressed. Any group that is defined in terms of sin and of crime cannot feel anything else but oppressed.
I was always extremely careful. And for 30 years, I didn't go into a public lavatory in case there was an agent provocateur down there and I could be arrested. Some police stations were very good. But others were appalling in the record of the way they treated gay people.
Inspector Angus Hussey, I am in charge of the National Garda Diversity and Integration Unit. I think definitely the Guards do reflect where society was at a certain period of time. I think we have learnt a lot and changed a lot over the decades. I think we're much more open to change now and much more aware of the diverse and minority groups that are out there. I can't comment on the Declan Flynn case as it happened almost 40 years ago. However, I do know that if it happened today, it would be dealt with differently. Today, the investigation into Declan's killing would be dealt with as a hate crime investigation.
With 5 men in custody charged with murder, Declan Flynn's family and their supporters felt justice was sure to be done.
When people were apprehended for it, we felt this is a chance for justice for the community. And the fact that the people were pleading guilty was another added benefit. In a way, it seemed to remove the police from the process, so there was some confidence that the judicial system would deliver a fair verdict.
We really thought that this was cut and dried, that the evidence was there and that they would be punished for their crime.
But just as Ireland's police service reflected the country's values in the 80s, so too did the justice system.
The Declan Flynn case highlights that the climate in which criminal trials are conducted matters. Criminal trials can be influenced by the atmosphere of society, by the values of society. The law on murder and manslaughter hasn't really changed. The law on sentencing hasn't really changed, but our values as a society have changed. That's a very important thing to consider when we look at criminal trials.
Ireland's social values came to bear on the trial when Declan's killers offered a plea.
The 5 suspects in the case were initially all charged with murder, but 4 of them pleaded guilty to manslaughter.
The 4 were Robert Armstrong, Anthony Marr, Patrick Kavanagh and Colm Donovan. They admitted to attacking Declan, but claimed it was manslaughter as they never intended to kill him. The Director of Public Prosecutions accepted this guilty plea. It was a controversial decision that meant 4 of the 5 suspects would now not face a murder trial.
At a time when one couldn't be sure that a jury of 12 people would take seriously a murder charge against somebody who was present in a known gay cruising area at a time when homosexual acts were against the law. Perhaps the DPP was concerned that if it went to a full murder trial, that a jury might actually acquit them, and that would have been an extremely bad result. And so only one of them went on trial for murder. The trial of the youngest, the 14-year-old, went ahead.
The 14-year-old was never named because of his age. From the start, Edwin knew that the forensic case against him was weak.
I remember he was being defended by Mr. O'Higgins. O'Higgins wanted to know, could the forensic evidence link his client with the scene and with the murder? So I told him no, it couldn't be linked. So the 6 could be matched to the beating, but none of that could be linked back to any of the suspects, because we didn't have DNA back in those days.
Meanwhile, barristers for the accused claimed the 14-year-old had not played a significant part in the attack.
It would seem that the 14-year-old's defence basically was that he had a very minimal role in what transpired, that he was behind a tree while the others inflicted the main blows to Declan Flynn's body, and that although he hit Declan Flynn, he hit him on the behind, and that wouldn't have been a material cause of death.
Before the jury could even consider whether the boy was guilty of murder, the judge, Mr. Justice Gannon, intervened.
He withdrew the murder charge from the jury, which is something that a trial judge can do. It's part of the function of a trial judge to withdraw a charge from the jury if he or she feels that there's insufficient evidence. On the basis of the newspaper reports, with no great explanation as to why the murder charge was withdrawn.
The judge actually instructed to the jury that he not be found guilty of murder due to insufficient evidence, and he was found guilty of manslaughter.
4 men and 1 child were now guilty of killing Declan. It was up to Mr. Justice Gannon to determine their sentences.
I asked for time off from work, and my colleagues in the bank tried to persuade me not to go down. But I just felt I had to go down because I wanted to see what these people looked like. I wanted them to look like monsters, but they didn't.
One defendant appeared for sentencing wearing his Irish Air Corps uniform, and there was no shortage of support for the defendants.
We had priests giving character references for the killers. We had the killers themselves vindicating their behaviour by positioning themselves and declaring themselves anti-gay vigilantes. And that went unchallenged in court.
All 5 were guilty only of manslaughter, but could still face lengthy jail terms.
On a conviction for manslaughter, a judge has a very wide sentencing discretion. So a judge can impose on a conviction for manslaughter any sentence up to and including life imprisonment.
But what happened next was really what instigated or doubled down, I suppose, on the horror of the event.
Mr. Justice Gannon, at the sentencing stage, according to the newspapers, made several statements saying, you know, this was an abhorrent crime, that it was one of the saddest and most tragic cases ever to come before the courts.
But the Flynn family were shocked when the judge then expressed sympathy for Declan's killers.
Justice Gannon said at the time that these people were from good families, that they probably had a low risk of reoffending, that they've learned their lesson. We're all entitled to our prejudices and biases, but we're not entitled to express them through violence.
The words Justice Gannon used when he was summing up were the ultimate insult to my family and my parents, and to Declan. I'm sure there's plenty of killers come from good households. That wasn't what he was charged to do.
He passed a number of sentences. They were of varying lengths, up to and including 5-year sentences. Crucially, all sentences were suspended.
I was so naive at the time, I didn't know what 5 years sentence suspended. I had to ask my brother, what does that mean? And he said, they're getting off. And I could not believe it. I wanted to shout up something and protest, but I just wasn't brave enough to do that. We were absolutely devastated. The 3 of us just walked out of the courtroom and out into the foyer of the 4 courts, and the prison van was parked outside on the quays. But obviously, those killers weren't going in it.
The judge released them just with a warning, a slap on the wrist. I mean, that effectively, to my mind, was a license to kill gay people.
I think it's difficult to conceive of any circumstances in which a death, a killing committed in a premeditated fashion by a gang would result in a suspended sentence. And I think that forces one to consider, if Declan Flynn had been an office worker taking a shortcut through a park at night and had been killed in similar circumstances, would those sentences have been as short as they were, and would they have been suspended? I think not.
Nobody who takes another human being's life should walk out the door when they've deliberately set out to cause them harm. Nobody should actually end up walking out the door if they've done that to another human being.
For the Flynn family, the sentences were a denial of justice. For the gay community, it was a call to action.
When the sentence was handed down, it wasn't a surprise. We were on our own, and we had to do something about it.
Declan Flynn was set upon by 5 men, including a youth. Yesterday, his 5 assailants were sentenced in the Central Criminal Court, convicted of the manslaughter of Declan Flynn. All of the sentences were suspended by Mr. Justice Gannon. Now, what this means is that if they don't get into trouble with the police during the period of their suspension, they will not serve any detention for depriving Declan Flynn of his life.
My mother and father were devastated. All their faith in the state was completely obliterated by the way Declan had been treated. There was no support for the family. There was no ability at that time to appeal the sentencing. There was no victim impact statements. When the court case was over and we walked out the door, that was the end of it, as far as the state was concerned.
It's important to note that the sentence at the time produced an outcry. There were several debates where Mr. Justice Gannon was criticised in the Dáil. Mary Harney, at the time a Fianna Fáil TD, said that the Minister for Justice should seek his resignation.
When handing down suspended sentences, Mr. Justice Gannon expressed his view that Declan's killers were unlikely to offend again. In the case of Robert Armstrong, he was wrong.
One of those who was convicted of the manslaughter of Declan Flynn and given a suspended sentence went on to commit a very serious criminal offence when he raped a pregnant woman and was subsequently sentenced to 10 years for that offence. I think that raises immediate questions about whether the sentences in the Flynn case were appropriate, and in particular whether it was appropriate for Mr. Justice Gannon to say, as he did, that the accused all came from good families and that it was very unlikely that they would reoffend.
The judge was criticised by politicians, he was criticised in the media, of course he was criticised within the gay community as well, about the leniency of this sentence. Perhaps if Armstrong had been jailed for the killing, would that woman have suffered that trauma? You know, one wonders what was really at play. If this judge, who was apparently very fastidious, very detail-focused, who was not adverse to handing out custodial sentence for incredibly minor crimes. I mean, he handed out a custodial sentence shortly after this trial for someone stealing a handbag.
I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that he was born in 1918. He was in his mid-60s sitting as a judge in the 1980s. He was the product of a very different time and presumably would have brought those values and that life experience to his time on the bench.
Police too came under criticism and were instructed to conduct an inquiry into why nothing had been done to stop the attacks in Fairview Park.
The Garda inquiry consisted of my eldest brother and my father being called down to Fitzgibbon Street Garda station and being interviewed by a guard who had his gun visible on display and being asked what journalists they had been talking to. They had no interest in finding out why nothing was done in Fairview Park to stop the beatings.
Meanwhile, in the killers' community, celebrations were held to mark the outcome of their trials and welcome them home.
Declan Flynn's killers had been let out, and we'd had reports that they'd worked up some celebratory bonfires and had some tinnies, one outrage after another. I mean, it's extraordinary offensive behaviour. Ireland has failed us, you know. We're on our own. And we had to do something about it.
The outcome of the trial is really what instigated what happened next, which is, you know, people call it the Irish Stonewall. People call it a catalyst moment for the gay communities demanding their rights.
There had been a lot of anger expressed, and we were conscious to try and temper that because we didn't want to provoke a reaction from the local community. So the focus was really on a protest against violence against gays and women. Instead of going to the usual sites, we would take the protest out to Fairview Park where the killing had happened. There had been a victory march by the perpetrators who had been released, and the community had supported them. So this was a way of kind of saying to the community that that's not acceptable.
It was about us trying to reclaim the streets where we didn't feel welcome, and we knew that we had no protection. We had no statutory protection. And then we were going up to the site where he was killed. Being out in the street, advocating and making noise, didn't really feel that different. What made it special was the scale of it. It was the first time that we were joined by our straight allies. Student union groups, radical left-field political parties, civil liberty groups. And that was really important. It was really necessary for us. I'm going to get really upset. It was really necessary for us to feel that level of support from people. Because after the court case, we just felt alone. And I remember us walking up from Liberty Hall, walking up Amiens Street to North Strand. I just remember walking up that street just so angry and also fearful that somebody was going to lob a rock at me.
But there was no violence. Instead, the protesters were met with open public support.
It's been such a show of solidarity, it's just incredible. I'm amazed so many people turned up, and a lot of local people turned up, and they were in favour of what was going on, which was very good.
The reason we're here today is to protest against violence against gays and women.
When you have an incident like somebody getting killed, it is, in many cases, the only way in which an issue like this will be raised publicly, and in which gay people will be taken seriously and their rights will in fact be respected.
Really kind of marked a new type of mass visibility. So you're really seeing like a group of people not only react to an injustice, but actually begin to build the beginnings of a mass movement around that.
The message was now also heard in the Irish Parliament.
But it was the first time in 1983 where we actually heard politicians in both houses of the Oireachtas actually addressing our needs. There was that glimmer of hope that maybe Irish society was on board with us.
Declan's killing helped make gay rights a national issue. Campaigners hoped to force a change in the law and legalise homosexuality. That fight was led by David Norris.
We had to clear away the discriminatory, homophobic legislation before we could get down to reinforcing it with strong, positive legislation for gay people. And my case was that the British Imperial Statute, which had never been discussed, was an infringement of my right to privacy. I couched the letters in the language that I thought would appeal to them. For example, to Fianna Fáil, I said, you call yourselves a Republican Party. How can you possibly support a British imperial statute?
David Norris brought his challenge to the Constitution all the way to Ireland's most powerful court.
On the 22nd of April, the Supreme Court gave its verdict on David Norris's constitutional action. By a 3-2 majority, it upheld the existing law.
After today, it can be said that the Irish Constitution does not protect the fundamental human rights of its own citizens.
But he and his supporters did not give up. They brought their fight to the European Court of Human Rights, and in 1988, they finally won.
The judgment in Senator Norris's favour was given by 8 votes to 6, with the Irish member of the court, Mr Justice Brian Walsh, among those dissenting.
The ruling made clear Ireland's criminalisation of homosexuality was in breach of the European Convention on Human Rights.
We have on our panel, you know, the rules of the soapbox. We listen uninterrupted and then...
And for some back home, it sparked outrage.
It's not normal for a man to be preoccupied with another man's back passage. But let's face it, this is what the Homosexual Male Act is about.
I mean, that's ridiculous. That's quite insulting. Like, I mean, I'm not...
But support for legalising homosexuality was becoming increasingly mainstream.
I suppose the quick answer is, what about men who are besotted with women's front passages? Is the quick answer there.
The debate raged for 5 years, until in 1993, over a decade after Declan's killing, homosexuality was finally legalised.
Today's European Court decision is the end of a 14-year battle for Senator David Norris.
We were told early on that it would be a difficult and long fight, but we'd win out in the end. And that's exactly what happened.
I went from being a criminal one day to not being a criminal. Coming from a time when you could legitimately be refused service in a shop, in the hotel, whatever. Your boyfriend or girlfriend could be refused hospital visiting rights when their partner's dying of AIDS and denied any form of family status. It was really, really important that we'd actually moved to this new place.
2018 marked the 25th anniversary of decriminalisation. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, himself a gay man, made an official apology to all who had suffered under Ireland's anti-gay legislation.
The bench where Declan Flynn was killed at Fairview Park was covered with flowers and notes. And we think of him today on this anniversary and the very different Ireland that we now live in.
The government also hosted a state reception in Dublin Castle to mark the anniversary.
I was in Dublin Castle, and it was the first positive thing that had happened since Declan's killing.
Since decriminalisation in 1993, this country has chosen more and more to love rather than to hate.
It was marking the change that had taken place in Irish society. And to that extent, I think it was a very positive thing.
I've seen Pride develop over the many years from the late 70s until today, and it's amazing to see the difference over that amount of time. I mean, back then we kind of gathered in fear and trepidation. We weren't sure what the response would be, particularly in the Fairview March. Today we come here in celebration. We're acknowledging all the achievements we've had over the many years. So while we've much to celebrate today, there retains an element of protest. Protest is definitely on the agenda still for the Pride parades.
We've seen some shocking examples recently of gay men being brutalised and murdered in Ireland.
The vigil held outside the town hall was attended by hundreds. It was within walking distance of where both Aidan Moffat and Michael Snee had lived.
But one of the salient differences between the place we find ourselves in today and the time that Declan Flynn and Charles Self were murdered was that it's no longer acceptable. It's no longer acceptable amongst the mainstream of Irish society, and it's very definitely not accepted by statutory Ireland. We are afforded a level of protection that did not exist, that was unimaginable in the 1980s.
I think it's extraordinarily noble what people did at that time to be so visible in the face of violence. And I think that for the people who were organised that march, who showed up, it was dangerous, and people still did it. As a community, we kind of owe everything to people who created those building blocks at the time, because much harder then than it is now.
It's an extremely important milestone in the LGBT+ story in Ireland. As a gay person myself, I often think if I'd been born 2 decades earlier, might that have been me? Might that have been one of my friends?
It's strange to think that he's become this figure for the gay community now. It's understandable, but at the end of the day, he's not just a headline from a newspaper, or he's not just somebody that maybe represents that particular point in history.
I think Declan would have been very happy with all the changes in society nowadays and the freedom people have. But because he was such a reserved, quiet person, I don't think he would have liked all this attention. You know, he's become an icon. As far as we're concerned, he was our much-loved brother that we lost in horrific circumstances. And we'd like him back.
I would like people to remember that he was our brother, and he was a warm, giving human being. We need to keep ownership of that, because we're still mourning the fact that he's no longer with us.
A self-made couple making plans for the next stage of their lives.
They were getting ready to have a quiet retirement.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back.
They had a lot of friends and loved spending time with family.
Gunned down, execution style, in their own home.
It just seemed to make no sense. Who would do that, and what could possibly be the motive?
While searching for the killer, investigators uncover a world of greed and deceit.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money.
He felt he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb.
People were saying that he was very upset. It's certainly his motive.
A series of chilling discoveries.
We learned that he was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Everything he's told us is a lie.
Points to a killer no one ever imagined.
People were shocked.
It shows what a messed up psyche he's got.
It was unbelievable how somebody can be that cold-blooded.
On the outskirts of La Crosse, Wisconsin, lies the prestigious neighborhood of Berry Mills. In early spring of 2010, this quiet community is rocked by a disturbing 911 call.
911, what is the address to David? Okay, what's going on?
I'm in my mom and dad's house. I came out to check on
Your dad is what?
He's on the floor.
Where's your mom?
My mom is by the computer.
Is your mom breathing?
No.
Okay, and your dad is not breathing?
No.
Okay, all right.
Police race to the scene. First responding officers lead 40-year-old Eric Kola away from his deceased parents' home, while detectives head inside.
We could see that there was a male lying on the kitchen floor. There was a large pool of blood around his head.
The blood was coagulated, so it had been there a while. You know, it wasn't fresh blood.
He was holding his car keys in one hand. He had his coat on, so it was clear that he had just walked in the door. He hadn't even set everything on the counter yet. As I viewed the male victim, the wounds appeared to be a gunshot. It was near the temple of his head.
Around the corner is like a hallway entryway with a computer desk, and the female victim was there. She was shot in the head also.
Her hands are on the keyboard, and so you could see that she had been typing before she was shot. What she was typing didn't appear to be significant, but it made us believe that she had no idea that someone was behind her going to shoot her. It appeared that they ambushed them.
The victims are identified as 68-year-old Dennis Kola and his wife, 65-year-old Myrna. As investigators examine the scene, they make note of other telling details.
We didn't know if it was a single killer or more than one person, but you would expect more disturbance if there were more than one, or that they would have overpowered the victims, and that didn't seem to have happened.
With Myrna sitting at the computer comfortably, it led us to wonder if she was the first to be killed. And her husband, Dennis, came home, and he was the second one shot. There was the smell of decomposition. At that point, we weren't sure how many days earlier they were killed, but we needed to get information pretty quickly.
Detectives find no sign of forced entry and no indication of any kind of struggle.
The crime lab comes in. They collect fingerprints and DNA and a computer for analysis. We went upstairs and we noticed in the one bedroom there was a dresser that was disturbed, and it appeared that it had been ransacked. What was unusual about it was the person started at the top and worked their way down with the chest of drawers. But if you did it that way, you wouldn't be able to see what was in the drawer below it.
This looked like someone was trying to make it look like a burglary, but nothing seemed to be missing.
And there were many other valuables in the house, including Myrna's purse, and Dennis' wallet was still in his back pocket. It looked like this was staged, quite frankly.
While investigators continue searching for clues, they find what could be a key piece of evidence.
The bedroom had a .22 rifle in the closet. There's also a box of .22 shells on a shelf that had been moved and partially opened.
That was very possibly the gun that was used in the homicides.
So the gun is sent to the crime lab for an analysis.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of the murders spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
When I heard about it, I thought, I can't believe this is happening. I was devastated. It hit me real hard. It was like, why would somebody kill them? Everybody loved them.
Born and raised in Wisconsin, Dennis and Myrna Kola had been happily married for 42 years.
Dennis and Myrna had a lot of friends. They had deep roots here.
They had children and grandchildren, and they were very popular.
I didn't hear of anyone that had anything bad to say about either one of them.
From humble beginnings, Dennis rose to become a successful businessman.
Dennis had graduated as a pharmacist, and he had owned a number of pharmacies and businesses throughout the years in different locations.
I worked with him for 2 years. As a boss, he was down to earth, fantastic guy. If you needed something, he was there. He treated me like a daughter.
Dennis was successful in life and in love.
Him and his wife, they were always happy, having a good time. Myrna had a lot of energy. She was very sociable.
Myrna was very well educated, and she was presently teaching part-time on a substitute basis.
They had a good marriage. They enjoyed life.
The couple had 2 children, their son Eric and 37-year-old daughter Cindy. Both were married with families of their own.
Their family seemed pretty tight. Dennis and Myrna, they were involved with their kids and involved with their grandkids.
These were parents who were very dedicated. They really wanted the best for their kids and loved spending time with family. Dennis and Myrna were getting ready to have a quiet retirement and relaxing and enjoying life.
Now, those dreams have been brutally snatched away.
Both shot. I would have never in my life expected something like this to happen.
It just seemed to make no sense. We're trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
While police bring the Cola's son Eric into the station to get more information, investigators go door to door looking for witnesses.
We start canvassing to see if anyone saw anything, heard anything.
Nobody in the neighborhood had seen anything suspicious.
For them, it was just mostly shock. They couldn't believe that these 2 people had been killed.
As detectives continue to search for a lead, they get their first break.
One of the neighbors mentioned that he thought he knew the motive and why it happened, and also the murder.
He was very concerned. He believed that his life was in danger. He felt that he may be next.
This neighbor, Steve Burgess, was a banker, and he thought that he may have been the intended target of the homicide. His reasoning was he had got a threatening call multiple times from a person that threatened to kill him.
Coming up, new evidence emerges.
The day after the homicides, he cashed his $50,000 check and never told us.
And family secrets come to light.
There was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the 2.
Dennis always complained that he was worthless and that he didn't want to work.
She had apparently lit into Dennis in a rage.
Until a disturbing clue reveals a twisted plan.
Someone had put this threatening note in his mailbox.
Now he believes that someone was out to get him.
And exposes a cold-blooded betrayal nobody saw coming.
I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
It was extremely unexpected.
It's just chilling.
Grandparents Myrna and Dennis Kola have been brutally executed in their own home. Now, one of their neighbors, banker Steve Burgess, tells investigators the killer could be coming after him.
He was very concerned, and he believed that someone was out to get him, and he didn't know who, but the homicides may have been intended for him and his family.
Detectives ask Steve why someone would want him dead.
So at that time, the market crashed. There was people with money issues.
A lot of people came to him at the bank for loans, but they had no collateral. So people were very angry that Steve would not give them loans. The last threat was a couple of days earlier. It was a threat of violence. It certainly had to be taken serious.
If Steve was the intended target, how did Dennis and Myrna end up gunned down instead?
What he explained was a Google Earth search in front of Burgess's house showed the wrong address, showed Dennis and Myrna's address instead of his, and he thought that the killer killed the wrong people.
He felt that somebody had come to his house to follow through on the threat, but they ended up at Dennis and Myrna's residence. It was a concern that this possibly could have been a mistake on behalf of the murderer, and the homicides were not intended for Dennis and Myrna.
Before investigators can pursue the lead, the autopsy results arrive.
The autopsy report determined that they were both shot with a .22 caliber rifle.
But it was inconclusive. There wasn't enough bullet fragment left to tell if it came from the gun that we found in the house. No fingerprints were found. I mean, even from the victims, like the gun had been cleaned up.
The autopsy report also confirmed that they had been deceased for a few days before the 911 call. It was likely that they were killed on that Friday.
The time of death sheds new light on the threatening phone call made to neighbor Steve Burgess.
We saw that call had come in Sunday morning after the Coolas were murdered. So the timeline it didn't make any sense.
We were able to determine that the threats against Steve Burgess had nothing to do with the deaths of Dennis and Myrna.
With their first lead a bust, detectives turn their attention closer to home.
We knew Eric and his sister Cindy were very close to their parents.
Eric did day trading and stuff like that, work on stocks. He was doing well. Dennis and Eric were pretty close. Some people would say like bread and butter. They'd have get-togethers all the time.
Eric was the one that found the bodies. We needed a conversation with Eric for information that he might be able to provide us.
Hoping he can provide details about the crime, investigators interview Eric at the station.
Eric was still extremely emotional over the deaths of his parents, but he said he wanted to be as helpful as he possibly could and would do whatever he could to try to find who was responsible.
Detectives ask how he came to find his parents had been killed.
He said the school called and said that Myrna hadn't shown up for work. They called his parents and they didn't respond.
So Eric tried calling and was unable to get an answer, so he called his sister and asked if she had any contact with them, and she had not.
He became concerned and drove over to the house.
Once he walked in the house, he observed his father lying on the kitchen floor and started searching for his mom, and then also found her deceased.
Eric said he was extremely close to his parents. His dad, supported all of his endeavors. They were just the best of buddies.
We asked Eric what was the last time he had seen his parents, and he said a few days before the homicides.
He visited them like he did all the time. He said his dad was working on the deck, and his mom was doing laundry. There didn't seem to be anything unusual.
Investigators ask Eric where he was on the day of the murders.
He said that Friday was he and his wife's anniversary. He had worked till 2. Then he helped his buddy Mike do some work in a bathroom. They were renovating a bathroom. Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house, looking for a specific plant that his wife liked, a hanging plant.
Eric presents a receipt stamped at 6:15 p.m.
After he bought the plant, he went directly home, and they got ready to go out for the evening with friends to celebrate the anniversary. Eric said that he had tried over the weekend to contact his parents and wasn't able to do so. He was becoming concerned, but just thought that they were busy.
When asked who might have wanted to harm his parents, Eric says they were well-liked and had no enemies.
It seemed really strange, really unusual. No reason for the victims to be killed. Both victims killed.
Before concluding Eric's interview, detectives get results back from the crime lab.
The report came back indicating that the time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Myrna was using the computer, and the last keystroke was 5:41 p.m. So that gave us a timestamp that's huge.
With the keystroke data, detectives verify Eric's alibi.
We spoke to his friend Mike, and Mike said yes, Eric was here until about 5:30 when he left, and he was going to go to the store. So he basically confirmed what Eric was telling us was correct. The receipt, combined with what his friend Mike said, it appeared that there wasn't enough time for Eric to commit the crime. Also, it just seemed very unlikely that someone who loved his mother and father very much could be involved in something like this.
Before Eric leaves the police station, he remembers crucial information that takes detectives by surprise.
Eric had told us that his sister Cindy and her husband Pat were being financially supported by Dennis and Myrna, and that their dad, Dennis, told Cindy they were getting cut off financially.
The Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy had called Dennis. Dennis let her know that there was not going to be any more money. She became very upset.
Had there been an argument over money leading Cindy to kill?
That's extremely unexpected, but she did have motive, so you start looking at Cindy as a suspect.
Police investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their daughter Cindy may have been angry with her father after he cut off financial support. The two had a tense conversation just hours before the murders.
When we started talking to the circle of friends and family, we were told Dennis was more than generous. He gave tens of thousands to Cindy and her husband.
Cindy relied on her parents. They needed this money to pay their bills. When Dennis had told Cindy that he was cutting her off, she didn't know how those bills were going to get paid.
Detectives learn the Colas children are set to inherit over $700,000 from their parents' death. While son Eric is known in the community as a successful businessman, Cindy's circumstances are different.
Cindy didn't have much money, if any, and she was constantly asking for money because they were not making ends meet.
She was working a minimum wage job or a little above that, and Pat, her husband, couldn't keep a job, would quit or get fired. They were living paycheck to paycheck and Dennis's handout to handout.
Me and Dennis would talk about Cindy at the pharmacy, and he kept telling me that he was sick and tired of supporting her every month, helping them out with their bills and stuff like that. And that Friday morning, he was very upset, and he said, "My daughter called me this morning, crying on the phone because I told my daughter that I'm cutting her and her husband off."
When she would get upset, she would get just extreme, over-the-top emotions. Cindy hearing that the cash cow was being butchered would be a reason for her to now go off the rails, and it went from bad to worse.
Cindy became a strong suspect.
Police bring Cindy into the station for questioning.
Cindy appeared broke up over the deaths of her parents, but she really laid out the family dynamic. Her parents had considered her the black sheep of the family. She said that she didn't believe her parents cared about her like they cared about Eric, and she was upset with how they treated her.
She told us, according to her parents, that Eric could do no wrong and that Cindy was a disappointment and continued to be a disappointment.
But Cindy denied that she had anything to do with her parents' death, even though there was this friction between them.
Investigators questioned Cindy about the argument with her father the morning of the murders.
Cindy downplayed the conversation she had with her father. She said just that she was disappointed her father had said he wouldn't give her any money. But it wasn't a negative conversation.
Detectives wonder if Cindy is more guilty than she's letting on.
There was a lot of tension between Cindy and her parents. There was disapproval there.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money with the inheritance, and given her bad feelings, all these things could lead to the fact that she may have been the one that took the lives of her parents.
With suspicion swirling, police ask Cindy where she was when her parents were killed.
On Friday, she was working and had left at 4:45. They have a time clock. She had punched out.
After work, she had stopped at the store just after 5:30. She purchased beer and ice, and then her and Patrick at a barbecue with the neighbors.
Police work to confirm Cindy's alibi.
She was working. That was verified then. Cindy had stopped at a Quick Trip, and the Quick Trips all have video, so she was on camera at a Quick Trip near her home at the time of the homicides, not anywhere near her parents.
While Cindy is ruled out as the shooter, her husband Patrick comes into focus.
Family and friends said that Patrick did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and Patrick stood to inherit a substantial amount of money along with Cindy.
Dennis did not like her husband at all. He told me that Cindy's husband married Cindy for the money because he knew that Dennis and Myrna had money. Dennis always complained that his son-in-law, Patrick, was worthless and that he didn't want to work. He sits and plays with the video games, and he's too lazy to go find a job.
Investigators dig deeper into Patrick's relationship with his in-laws.
Talking to family and friends, we learned that Dennis and Myrna were upset when Patrick and Cindy got married. They asked Cindy not to marry him. They felt that he lacked motivation, and they remained unhappy with him. And I think the feeling was mutual.
According to some reports, when there was alcohol involved, he could have been a violent person.
Apparently, the Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy told Patrick that they were not going to be getting any more money. People were saying that Patrick was even more angry than Cindy, that they were being cut off financially. It was a large red flag.
Detectives also learned Patrick had the capability to pull off an execution-style hit.
Eric and other relatives were now pointing us toward Patrick, saying that he was a Marine and that he knew how to handle weapons.
It certainly moves Patrick up to the top of the list as far as suspects.
Police hunting the killer of Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their son-in-law, Patrick Cowell, has motive for murder.
Patrick was a great interest to us because he did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and he stood to inherit a lot of money, so it certainly is motive. And Patrick was in the Marine Corps, so he would be an expert marksman.
When I heard that the police are starting to question him, I thought maybe after Dennis mentioned cutting them off, that might have triggered his son-in-law to kill them both.
At the police station, detectives confront Patrick about his relationship with his in-laws.
Patrick said that he was not popular in that family, that he was not comfortable with them. They weren't comfortable with him. There was kind of a cold relationship. He knew from Cindy that they were being cut off from Dennis and Myrna. He wasn't happy about it, but he denied having any involvement in the homicides.
Investigators press Patrick about where he was at the time of the murders.
He was without a job at the time, and basically he spent most of his day on the sofa with Xbox. We asked if he had any guns in the house, and he agreed that he did. We asked if he would turn those over to us, and he said he would.
As detectives wrap up their interview with Patrick, patrol officers are dispatched to collect the gun and gaming console, which are then sent on to the crime lab.
The gun had been analyzed and, in fact, was eliminated as the weapon used to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Also, we were able to prove through the crime lab that he was on the Xbox at the time he said he was. And so that eliminated him because he was home at the time that Dennis and Myrna were killed.
With Patrick ruled out, police are left scrambling for new suspects. The unsolved homicides leave the community on edge.
When a crime like this happens in a small town like Barry Mills, there's a lot of pressure on law enforcement to get it solved. People want answers. These aren't strangers to them. These are people they know.
People in that neighborhood were fearful. You know, the closer you are to something like that, the more concerned you are.
We were kind of scared for our lives because we didn't know why something like this would happen.
Looking for new leads, investigators dig into Dennis's business connections and the wealthy pharmacist's other ventures around town.
Dennis had a nephew, Nick Herring, who was promised a business from Dennis. They were going to open a car dealership together and actually did.
What we understood was that Nick was very familiar with running car dealerships and had done a good job.
Business was good, but then Dennis changed the deal.
As the dealership was up and running, Dennis brought Eric, his son, in to start running it with Nick, and there was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the two.
Nick was like complaining all the time, so Dennis had to go help out with the business. Dennis said they could not get along together, and he ended up buying Nick out.
At that point, Nick was quite unhappy, and there was some falling out.
Tension mounted until Dennis sold the business, leaving Nick resentful.
Nick lost a pretty substantial amount of money, so he would certainly have reason to be upset.
Could Nick have harbored a deadly desire for revenge? Police bring him into the station for questioning.
We spoke to Nick Herring, and he admitted that the relationship had soured.
Nick had said that Dennis had given him too low amount for the business and that he got cheated out of some profit. Nick felt that he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb by his uncle.
Despite the bad blood, Nick insists he's not involved in the murders.
Nick said that it was in the past that he had started his own car dealership. He was successful, and that although it was upsetting, he wouldn't hold a grudge, and he had no reason to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Nick said that he had worked until about 5:30. Then he had picked up his girlfriend, and they'd gone out to the tavern. We were able to confirm that he was at work all day, and then the bartender where they were at could confirm that he and his girlfriend had spent the evening. And so we were able to eliminate him.
Having ruled out yet another suspect, the investigation into the Kohler murders hits a roadblock.
It was very disturbing because it just seemed to make no sense. Here's a couple that are a retirement age, had long, successful careers. For someone to come in and just murder them, it's senseless. We were still trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
1 week after the murders, police receive news that jolts the investigation back to life.
We get a call that a patrol car is being sent out to Eric Kula's residence for a suspicious item in the mailbox. Eric said that he had got a threatening letter. He was now extremely concerned that he was going to get killed.
One week after Dennis and Myrna Kohler are ruthlessly gunned down in their own home, police learn their 40-year-old son Eric has received a threatening note. Could he be the next target?
Someone had put this note in his mailbox. He was really, really concerned. This note said, "Fixed you." The message is kind of unusual, but Eric thought they'd killed his parents and were now going to come after him.
He had no idea who would have left it or where it came from.
There was an envelope, but it wasn't mailed.
The handwriting looked like it was done by someone very young. It was so strange. It was probably written that way so a handwriting analysis couldn't be done.
When it comes to Eric's safety, Detectives don't take any chances.
We have to try to figure out what was going on.
We had an investigator and a camera to watch his property. We start canvassing Eric's neighborhood to see if anyone saw anything.
But with no witnesses, police are still left with no idea who placed the note.
This is perplexing. We're trying to determine, was this somebody local or was this someone from out of the area? We were very concerned.
With this new potential threat, investigators cast a wider net to find the Colas killer. But when they scour Dennis and Myrna's computers, phones, and finances, they're surprised at what they find.
We subpoenaed Dennis and Myrna's bank records and noticed that there's a check written and cashed on Dennis and Myrna's account for $50,000. It's cashed on the day after the murder, and it's made out to Eric Kula and was deposited into Eric's bank account. It seemed really strange. So you just found your parents dead, and the next day you go cash a check for $50K. It had to be looked at.
Detectives reach out to Eric, hoping to learn more details.
Eric's explanation is his dad gave it to him on the day that he had stopped over at his parents' house.
That's very interesting because of all the conversations we had with Eric, he never mentioned this, and suddenly we have a check for $50,000, and if everything was okay, why wouldn't he tell us about it?
To have a check that was deposited the day after the murders by a family member, that set off alarms for investigators.
After we find that check, we look for other checks.
We used a forensic accountant to review Eric's finances because it was quite complicated with the day trading that he was involved in. When the accountant went through it with us and explained what we were looking at, I think we almost fell off our chairs because we had no idea that this was what was going on. He told everybody that he was extremely successful with his day trading, but Eric was broke.
He was day trading, but it was a myth as far as making profit. The person looking at his financials basically called BS. She told us this guy's worth nothing. He's worth about $2,000 total. He was blowing smoke.
Then, police uncover more startling information about Eric's financial circumstances.
We learned that Eric was also going to his parents and receiving large amounts of money. Through the years, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. He led everybody to believe that he was doing so well, including his wife. Eric told her that he was making a lot of money. There was nothing to worry about, that he was just doing great.
Despite everyone's impression that Eric was this successful day trader, his parents had been funding his and his family's lifestyle.
If he was going to have to admit that to family, friends, it was going to be devastating.
Detectives learn when Dennis and Myrna stopped financially supporting their daughter, Cindy, they also cut off Eric.
We knew just shortly before Dennis and Myrna were killed, Eric found out that he was no longer getting money from his parents.
The damning evidence continues to pile up against Eric.
Dennis told me he was giving money to Eric, but basically he was done giving to both kids. He says, I need to tell them I'm done supporting them. It's about time I put my foot down and cut them off.
As investigators start to discover that Eric is not what he seems, shocking results come back from the lab.
The state crime lab did a handwriting analysis on that check for $50,000. It wasn't Dennis's signature on that check. We found out that it was Eric's handwriting, that he had forged his father's name on that check.
Everything he's told us is a lie. So things are starting to really roll toward Eric.
Police obtain a warrant to search Eric's home, hoping to find additional incriminating evidence.
We're in the basement. Among other things, was a box of envelopes in a desk drawer. The fixed U note had a security envelope, and every one of them has a different pattern for their security pattern. Lo and behold, those envelopes have the same pattern. We were able to determine that envelope in Eric's mailbox with the fixed U-note came from the box of envelopes in his home. From his fire pit in his backyard, we found things that would be associated with making a fixed U-note. A spring from a spiral notebook. The letter was written on spiral notebook paper. A barrel of a pen used to write the address. Those types of things are in the fire. So that fixed U-note came from his house. It didn't look good for Eric.
In the search, detectives also discover a .22 caliber rifle, similar to what police believe was the murder weapon. The gun is sent to the ballistics lab for testing.
With the lies and forgery, we were pretty confident that Eric was our guy.
But at that point, Eric had an alibi for the entire time that the homicides were occurring. So we're trying to figure out how he shot Dennis and Myrna.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola suspect the couple's own son, 40-year-old Eric, is the killer. But they need hard evidence to lay charges.
We went out and started re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing all the evidence that we had.
As detectives try to learn more details about Eric's connection to the crime, the ballistics results come back. Police wonder if the rifle found in Eric's home will prove to be the murder weapon.
Dennis and Myrna were shot with a .22 caliber rifle, but Eric's gun wasn't the gun that was involved in the crime.
Undeterred, detectives recheck Eric's alibi for when his parents were being murdered.
The time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Prior to the homicide, Eric said that he'd helped his buddy Mike renovating a bathroom.
When we originally talked to Mike, he said that Eric had left his house about 5:30, but when we re-interviewed him, he said it's very possible it could have been earlier. Once Mike's story changed, we really thought that we were heading in the right direction.
Investigators take a closer look at Eric's timeline.
Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house to get a specific plant for his wife. At the time of the homicide, he had stopped at the first store, and that store didn't have it, so he had to go to the other store, got the plant, and produced a receipt.
Eric's receipt is stamped 6:15 p.m. The second store is located only 10 minutes from the Cola's residence. But where was Eric at 5:41 when his parents were being shot?
We checked with the garden center, the first one he went to, and they had plenty of those plants on the day and time that Eric said that they didn't have any. We also reviewed video footage, and he's not there, nor is his vehicle seen coming or leaving the parking lot. So there was a window of opportunity for Eric to commit the murders. He had no alibi for the time that the computer showed that Myrna was shot.
With Eric's alibi torn apart, detectives bring him in for another interview. They begin by confronting Eric about forging the $50,000 check.
Eric explained that he had permission from his dad to write checks out to himself, and that his dad had actually given him the check, but just was too busy, so told him to sign it himself. He told us, "I write them all the time," and that was commonplace for him to do that. It's a lie, an approvable one. He's never written one. He couldn't produce a single check that he'd ever written. He was confronted with the fixed U-note and about the envelopes, and that they did come from his house. With what we found and what we knew about his financials, all of those things together are great evidence.
We just went down item after item after item after item, and Eric acted, in my opinion, desperate, and he wanted to leave.
But Eric was no longer free to go. On July 29th, 2010, police charge Eric with the murder of his parents, Dennis and Myrna Cola.
What we believe started this whole crime in motion was the fact that Eric was being cut off financially. He was desperate.
Detectives pieced together how the double homicide unfolded.
We believe he went to see his mom at their home, and Myrna was sitting at the computer, and then Eric walked upstairs, got the gun that was located in the closet, came down and shot his mother, and then waited for his father to arrive. When Dennis came home, he was shot almost immediately, within seconds after he walked through that door.
After the murders, Eric wipes the gun clean and returns it to the closet.
Eric then took a check and said to himself, $50,000 will get me through until the will is settled.
After he shot his parents, he went to a garden center, bought the plant for his alibi, and went home to celebrate their anniversary dinner that night.
He's as cold-blooded as a murder-for-hire man. His parents did nothing but love him and take care of him his whole life. He's a narcissistic little son of a bitch and thought that his dad owed him a living.
Eric Cola's arrest stuns the community.
Everyone thought that he was this golden child, that he had a great relationship with his parents, that he was this successful day trader. That he could have done this, people were shocked.
I would have never expected Eric to do this. The way Dennis talked about him, always bragged about his son, and I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
In June 2012, 2 years after Dennis and Myrna Cola were killed, a jury finds their son Eric guilty of intentional murder.
His sister, Cindy, during the sentencing hearing, was sobbing, and she begged the judge in that courtroom to make sure justice was done that day.
Eric Cola is sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 6 years for forgery.
Many times I've thought about how somebody could do that, and I just simply can't fathom it. I guess we all lose a bit of our innocence when this kind of thing happens.
Myrna and Dennis are still dearly missed by their family and friends.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back. I think of them very, very often. And my memory of Dennis is always a smiley face. I do miss him a lot. Sometimes I still think, boy, why did it have to be you? He'd still be living right now, happy life, finally retired, and enjoying his grandkids. And Myrna would probably still be dragging him on vacation.